I sprinted toward the operating room, my heart pounding so violently it felt as if it might explode after I received the news that my husband was in critical condition. But the moment my hand touched the freezing steel door, a nurse suddenly grabbed my sleeve. "You need to hide. Please, trust me," she whispered, her voice trembling with panic. Without a second to ask anything, I did exactly as she said and slipped into a nearby storage room. In the suffocating darkness of the cramped space, all I could hear was the sound of my own ragged breathing. 10 minutes later, the door cracked open, and what I saw made the blood in my veins turn to ice. Why would a wife like me need to run and hide instead of rushing to her dying husband? To understand that, I have to tell you about the night that changed everything. If you're willing to follow me into this story, one that feels impossible to believe, stay with me until the next part, where the truth will begin revealing itself layer by layer. That night, rain hammered violently against the windows of our apartment in Dilworth, as if the entire sky was weeping. The clock had just struck midnight. I, Marisol Grant, wrapped myself in an old cotton robe, pacing circles around the living room, nerves twisting in my chest. Desmond, my husband, still wasn't home. Normally, him working late wasn't unusual. Desmond managed a large construction company in Charlotte. Late nights had become routine. But tonight, something was off. Clearly, undeniably. A heavy pressure settled on my chest, making it hard to breathe. That morning, we'd argued about money. I had simply suggested we cut back on unnecessary spending, but Desmond snapped, his voice sharp, his eyes cold. "You don't know anything about running a company, Marisol. Stay out of my business." I froze. That wasn't the Desmond I knew, not the man who knelt beside Lake Norman 8 years ago to propose, promising to always listen, always respect me. That man had disappeared long ago. I stared down at the silent phone in my hand. Desmond usually texted me something familiar every night. "Babe, running late, traffic, don't wait up." But tonight, nothing. No text. No call. I had tried calling him 3 times. The first time, it rang endlessly. The next 2, it went straight to voicemail. Maybe his phone died, I whispered to myself, even though deep down I knew I was just clinging to false comfort. Outside, the storm grew fiercer, smashing against the glass like a warning. I pulled the curtain aside and looked down at the empty street. Water shimmered across the pavement, distorting the glow of streetlights into eerie streaks of light. And right then, as I watched the storm swallow Charlotte, a strange chill ran down my spine, as if everything I had believed for years was about to collapse. Don't look away, because the very thing that kept me from breaking down was the sudden memory that hit me right after. I suddenly remembered. 3 weeks earlier, Desmond had brought home a thick life insurance file worth millions of dollars. When I asked why we needed it, he told me it was for our future. I had even joked, "But why am I the one insured? You're the one with the dangerous job." Desmond only laughed and told me to sign, and I, like always, trusted him completely. But this morning, when I complained about the premiums being too high and suggested canceling the policy, his reaction terrified me. His face flushed red, his jaw clenched so tight it looked painful. "Don't ever mention canceling that policy again, Marisol. Do you hear me?" Back then, I thought he was just stressed from work. But tonight, in the cold storm, when all these strange signs piled on top of each other, I began asking myself, had I missed something important? Something that could change my life forever? 12:30 a.m. The landline suddenly rang, slicing through the suffocating silence of the apartment. I jumped. No one had touched that old phone in ages. These days, everyone used their cell phones, so its ringing felt like an omen. My hand shook as I picked up. Hello? Am I speaking to Mrs. Marisol Grant, wife of Mr. Desmond Tate? A cold, professional voice, completely devoid of emotion, came through the receiver. Why, yes. That's me. What happened to my husband? I felt as though invisible fingers were squeezing my throat, leaving me barely able to speak. Ma'am, please remain calm. Mr. Desmond Tate was involved in a severe car accident on Interstate 85. He has been transported to Queen City Regional Hospital. His condition is critical. He is being rushed into emergency surgery at this moment. The entire world collapsed around me. Critical? Emergency surgery? The words slipped out like hollow echoes. Yes, ma'am. Dr. Elias Carrington, our chief of surgery, is operating on him now. You should come to the hospital immediately. I'm going right now. I hung up before they could say more. For a moment, my whole body turned to stone. Then panic surged through me. I grabbed my coat, snatched my car keys. I didn't even bother changing out of my sleepwear. The drive from Dilworth to Queen City Regional Hospital usually took about 30 minutes. But that night, amid the storm lashing against the windshield and my heart tearing apart, the journey felt like an eternity. I drove in a daze, tears mixing with the relentless rain. The wipers thrashed desperately, but couldn't clear away the fear gripping me. In my mind, images of Desmond collided chaotically. His smile during dinner last week, his anger during our fight this morning. Guilt stabbed through my chest. What if that was the last conversation we'd ever have? What if those harsh words were the last thing he heard from me? Dear God, please save him, I whispered through sobs, repeating it like a desperate prayer. And in the middle of that chaos, a thought flashed through my mind like lightning. If Desmond didn't survive, then all the strange things happening recently, what would they become? And who would truly have to pay the price? Don't look away. The real battle was only beginning. At last, the tall white building of Queen City Regional Hospital appeared through the rain. I slammed the brakes, parked without caring about the lines, and dashed into the emergency entrance, drenched and gasping for breath. My husband, Desmond Tate, car accident, I panted to the nurse at the counter. She checked her computer. Mr. Desmond Tate, yes. He's been taken to the operating floor, 5th level. Take that elevator, turn right, or 5. I didn't wait a second. Instead of the elevator, I burst into the stairwell, climbing 5 flights without stopping. My heart hammered wildly, as if it might leap out of my chest. When I pushed the door open, I found myself in a long, sterile hallway glowing beneath cold fluorescent lights. At the far end stood the double steel doors. Above them, a red light glowed beside the words that made me freeze. Operating Room 5, in progress. Desmond was inside, fighting for every last breath. I ran toward the door, my hand lifting to push it open when, just as my fingertips touched the cold metal, a strong hand grabbed my arm. Don't do that. I jolted and spun around. A young nurse with wide, terrified eyes was standing right behind me. The name badge on her chest read, Janelle Porter, RN. You're Desmond Tate's wife, right? Nurse Janelle whispered, her voice so urgent it made it hard for me to breathe. Yes, my husband is in there. I have to... No. Janelle tightened her grip on my arm and pulled me away from the steel doors. You can't go in. More importantly, they can't know you're here. I froze. I don't understand. Who are they? And why do I have to hide while my husband is dying? Janelle looked at me, her eyes filled with a deep, desperate anguish. Listen to me carefully. This is not an emergency surgery. This is a trap. The word trap fell into the hallway like a blade. I went numb. A trap? What do you mean? Dr. Carrington is in there, and that's the problem. Janelle's voice tightened like a pulled wire. There's no time. You have to hide, right now. She pulled me toward an unmarked wooden door, half hidden behind a vending machine. This is the staff lounge. Go inside, lock the door. Don't make a sound no matter what you hear. Don't come out until I come back for you. Why should I trust you? I choked out. Janelle swallowed hard. Because I saw your husband's real medical file, before Dr. Carrington altered it. In reality, he was never seriously injured in any accident. A chill like electricity shot down my spine. Janelle didn't give me a chance to react. She shoved me into the dark room and said quickly, "Lock the door and trust me." The door slammed shut. I stood there, motionless in the suffocating darkness, fumbling for the lock with trembling hands. When the soft click finally sounded, I slid down onto the freezing tile floor, wrapping my arms around my knees. A fake medical file. Dr. Carrington. The warning. Everything spun in my head. Nothing made sense. But the terror in Janelle's eyes had been too real to ignore. I crawled to the door and pressed my ear against it. Complete silence. The phone in my hand read 1 a.m. Every second dragged on longer than a lifetime. Was Janelle crazy? Or had she just saved my life? 5 minutes, 7 minutes, 10 endless minutes. Then a very soft sound echoed from the hallway. A click. I immediately put my eye to the crack in the door. The red light above operating room 5 had gone out. The surgery was over. The steel doors slowly opened. Dr. Elias Carrington stepped out first. Still in his surgical gown, he lowered his mask. His face looked nothing like that of a man who had just fought to save a patient's life. He looked composed, almost relaxed. He casually peeled off his blood-stained gloves and tossed them into the medical waste bin. Then a second figure appeared. I waited for a gurney. I waited for Desmond's unconscious body. But no, Desmond walked out on his own 2 feet, stretching his back, rolling his neck, like he'd just spent too long in a boring meeting. No fourth line, no wounds, no bandages. He was completely fine. I clamped a hand over my mouth, stifling a sob. And then the third person appeared. A tall woman, her long, softly curled hair falling over a stylish dress, just visible beneath a white coat thrown loosely around her shoulders. Ariel Booker, Desmond's executive assistant, the woman who always looked at me with a half-smile full of contempt. The woman I had once been jealous of, then scolded myself for being ridiculous. Turns out, I wasn't ridiculous. I was blind. "Perfect execution!" Desmond's voice rang out down the sterile hallway. My chest throbbed like someone had punched straight through it. Dr. Carrington chuckled as if they were discussing weekend plans. "The emergency file is in the system. The fake ambulance report is logged. Officially, Desmond suffered severe internal injuries." Ariel smirked, handing Desmond a bottle of water. "I bet Marisol is on her way here right now, crying her eyes out." "Poor woman," Desmond laughed. The same sound that used to soothe me now scraped like metal on stone. "She's so predictable. She's probably on the verge of losing her mind by now." I bit down on the inside of my hand, but the physical pain couldn't drown out the agony in my chest. "When she gets here," Dr. Carrington said in a low voice, "you go to recovery, lie down. We'll hook you up to some monitors. You need to look weak but stable, like a post-op patient." Desmond rolled his eyes. "I know the script. The grateful husband, lucky to be alive." "Then I'll meet Marisol in the family lounge," Carrington continued. "I'll tell her the surgery went well, but—" He deliberately paused, like an actor on stage. Ariel tilted her head. "But what?" "But during surgery we discovered a dangerous blood clot near the pancreas. A second procedure is necessary tomorrow morning. We'll need Marisol's signature. It's a very high-risk operation." A cruel smile slowly spread across Desmond's lips. "And during that procedure—" "Exactly," Carrington nodded. "Anesthesia complication. Tragic. We did all we could." It felt like I was falling into a frozen abyss. They weren't targeting Desmond. They were targeting me. 3 weeks ago, the life insurance policy worth millions of dollars. Insured me. Signed by me. Because I trusted my husband. I had signed my own death warrant. Desmond spoke again. "When she doesn't wake up, the $3 million payout goes to me. We can disappear to Costa Rica." Ariel's lip curled. I already booked the tickets. First class, of course. My husband, his mistress, and the doctor who used to treat our family stood there plotting my murder like they were discussing the weather. Fear turned into something else, something cold, sharp, a pure, burning rage. They left the hallway. The three silhouettes slowly disappeared. I trembled, but not from fear, from the fury burning away every last trace of warmth inside me. Suddenly, keys rattled in the lock. The door opened. A sliver of light cut through the darkness. "Mrs. Marisol." Janelle slipped in and locked the door again immediately. "You saw it, didn't you?" I couldn't speak. I just nodded, tears of rage streaming down my face. "You heard everything?" "All of it," I whispered through shaky breaths. "The insurance policy, the fake surgery, the plan for tomorrow morning." Janelle closed her eyes, fighting back her emotions. I suspected for a long time, but hearing them confirm it like that. "Why are you helping me? Do you understand who you're going up against?" I asked. Janelle sat down right beside me. In the darkness, her voice was heavy as lead. "Because Dr. Carrington isn't a doctor. He's a predator." Janelle drew in a deep breath, as if preparing to open a door to a secret she had carried on her shoulders for months. "Dr. Elias Carrington has worked at Queen City Regional for 12 years, Janelle began, her voice low but steady. "On paper, he's an excellent surgeon with a flawless record, but I knew something was very wrong." "What was it?" I asked, wiping my tears, my voice still trembling. In the last 3 years, 7 routine surgeries under his care suddenly developed complications on the operating table. 7 patients, every single one of them died. And here's the stranger coincidence. All 7 had large life insurance policies, and all 7 surgeries were performed by Dr. Carrington. Another icy gust seemed to rush down my spine. Janelle continued. "The causes of death were vague. Adverse reaction to anesthesia, sudden internal bleeding. Things no one could ever definitively prove were malpractice. But one thing was very clear. After each patient died, the insurance company paid out. And a few weeks later, Dr. Carrington received research grants from shell companies no one has ever heard of." "Did you report this?" I asked, swallowing down a wave of nausea. "I tried." Janelle let out a bitter laugh. "No one believed me. He's highly respected here. Donates to charity, hosts conferences, has connections with the board. When I told the department head, they said I was paranoid, that these were just tragic coincidences." She paused, then looked straight at me. "But tonight is different." "And Desmond?" I asked, my heart growing colder. When I saw an emergency surgery scheduled under the name Desmond Tate, I checked immediately. There was no record from the ER, no ambulance report, no admission file, a patient who didn't exist until he suddenly appeared in the system. I dug my fingers into the edge of the chair. "What did you do then?" "I snuck into Dr. Carrington's office," Janelle said, a determined glint in her eyes, "and I found the real file. Desmond had a full physical 2 days ago. Results? Perfectly healthy." I went completely still. "In that same drawer, I found your life insurance policy, $3 million, and Dr. Carrington's name listed as the consulting physician." I whispered, "It's all connected." Janelle nodded. "And you were about to be cast in the same play they've used on every victim before you." I looked at her, my voice breaking. "You saved my life, Janelle." "Not yet." Janelle shook her head, her expression hardening. "They're waiting for you. You have to go out there and play your part, just like they're playing theirs." "I can't," I blurted out, my voice cracking. "I can't look Desmond in the eyes and pretend I don't know." "You have to, because if you don't, you'll die. Right now, they're moving Desmond to recovery. Any minute now they'll call you. You have to act like a panicked, desperate wife who's just relieved her husband survived." I swallowed hard. "And after that?" They'll bring you the paperwork to authorize the second surgery tomorrow morning. Janelle emphasized each word. Do not sign. But don't refuse outright either. Tell them you're in shock, that you need time, that you have to call his mother. Any excuse. Just stall. Stall for what? To get evidence, Janelle said firmly. We can't just run. They'll find you, and the police won't believe you without proof. What kind of proof? I asked, gripping the USB drive she had just placed in my hand. First, Desmond's real health report in Carrington's office. Second, the fake surgery file he entered into the system. Third, the basement security footage. Desmond did not come here by ambulance. He drove himself in like any normal person. Janelle spoke faster now. If we can get footage of him walking calmly into the hospital tonight, the entire accident story falls apart instantly. She pulled a white access card from her pocket. A MasterCard from the front desk. But there's a problem. The basement corridor has cameras, and Dr. Carrington monitors them from his office. My heart pounded in my chest. So what do we do? I'll create a distraction. I'll trigger the fire alarm on an upper floor. Security will rush up there. Meanwhile, you'll slip down to the basement and get into Carrington's office. Find the real file. Then go to the server room and copy tonight's security footage. She pressed the USB drive firmly into my palm. Use this. Once you've got the data, meet me at the basement emergency exit. I don't know if I can. You can. You have to. This is our only shot. In that moment, I realized a horrifying truth. They hadn't just planned to kill me. They had invested in an entire system built to erase every trace. And Janelle and I had exactly one chance to turn everything around. Don't click away. The next part is where the weak wife is forced to become a survivor. Right then, my phone vibrated. The name lighting up the screen made my blood turn cold. Dr. Elias Carrington. They're calling, Janelle whispered. Answer. Remember, fragile, sobbing, obedient. I drew in a deep breath, pressed accept, let the tremor into my voice. Hello? Mrs. Marisol? Thank God. Dr. Carrington's voice was warm, gentle, and venomous. Where are you? We've been waiting. I need to speak with you about your husband. I just got here, I said, forcing my voice to tremble. How is my husband, doctor? There was a pause on the other end of the line, clearly deliberate. He's a fighter, Mrs. Marisol. Dr. Carrington's voice dropped, rich with drama. The surgery was extremely difficult. We nearly lost him twice. The internal bleeding was very severe. Another pause, like he was staging a scene. But my team managed to stabilize him. He's past the most critical point, though he's still very weak. He's in recovery room 4 on the 5th floor. Oh, thank God. I burst into tears, pretending to be flooded with relief. Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. You can see him now, but there is another urgent matter we need to discuss regarding his treatment. Please come to recovery room 4 immediately. Yes, doctor, I'm on my way. I hung up and looked up at Janelle. The look in my eyes was no longer that of a panicked wife. It was the look of someone walking onto a battlefield. It's time, I whispered. Remember what I told you? Janelle gripped my shoulders. They'll bring you paperwork. Don't sign. Lean on any excuse you can. After that, go down to the basement. I'll trigger the fire alarm and meet you at the emergency exit with the evidence. I nodded and opened the staff room door as quietly as possible. The hallway was still calm, only the distant hum of machines floating through the air. I walked with deliberately unsteady steps, exactly like a wife in shock after a life-and-death scare. I stopped in front of the door marked Recovery Room 4, took a deep breath, and pushed it open. The room was lit by dim overhead lights and the soft glow of monitoring screens. Dr. Elias Carrington stood beside the bed with a clipboard in hand. Ariel was in the corner, her face arranged into an expression of fake concern. And on the bed was Desmond, his performance was flawless. His face had been made to look pale. An IV line was taped to his arm. The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily. His eyes were closed. His breathing was shallow and even, carefully controlled, so he would seem like someone who'd just barely escaped death. "Oh my God, Desmond!" I cried, rushing to the bed, sobbing loudly. I grabbed his hand. That hand was warm, steady, full of life. It felt nothing like the hand of a man who had almost died on an operating table. It took everything I had not to squeeze his hand hard enough to crush bone. "Doctor, he looks so weak." I turned to Dr. Carrington, tears brimming in my eyes. Carrington patted my shoulder, his voice radiating professional reassurance. "He lost a great deal of blood, Mrs. Marisol, but he will recover. He's very strong." "Thank God," I whispered. However, the word I'd been waiting for finally appeared. "Is there some kind of complication?" I lifted my head, letting staged fear flood my face. "Is something wrong, doctor?" "While we were operating to control the bleeding, we discovered something unexpected." His voice dropped. "A large blood clot near the pancreas. It's not directly related to the accident, but it is extremely dangerous. It could rupture at any time." "That means we have to remove it right away, don't we?" My lips trembled. "Exactly," Dr. Carrington nodded, radiating authority. "I've scheduled an emergency second operation for 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. A deep tissue surgery to remove the clot." In the corner, Ariel dipped her head slightly, the corner of her mouth lifting in a nearly invisible smile. "Another surgery?" I whispered. "For his safety, yes. But Mrs. Marisol—" Carrington flipped to another page in the file, as if this were just routine. "This procedure carries very high risk. The location of the clot is extremely delicate. There is a serious risk of complications related to anesthesia and internal bleeding. I'll need your written consent." He held the clipboard out in front of me. On it was a form with a bold printed heading, "High-risk surgical consent," and beneath it, a blank line waiting for my signature, one stroke of a pen, and I would be turning on the green light for my own death. At that exact moment, Desmond opened his eyes. "Sign it, babe," he whispered, trying to sound weak, but all I heard was the falseness. "I trust Dr. Carrington completely." Ariel stepped closer, her voice sweet but cold. "Mrs. Marisol, Desmond needs this surgery. Please don't hesitate." The three of them formed a circle around me. 3 predators, 1 prey. I looked at the pen in Dr. Carrington's hand, at Desmond's sick face, at the smile Ariel almost couldn't hide behind her mask of concern. In my mind, memories spun like a film on fast forward. 8 years ago, at the shore of Lake Norman, Desmond knelt in front of me, golden sunset light spilling over his brown hair. A diamond ring sparkled in his hand. "Marisol, you're the light of my life. I promise I'll always protect you, always listen to you, always respect you. Will you marry me?" I had cried with joy. "Yes, I will." 3 years ago, Desmond's construction company won a major contract. We celebrated at our favorite uptown Charlotte restaurant. He held my hand across the table, his eyes full of pride. "You know, everything I've achieved is because of you. You're my foundation, Marisol. Without you, I'm nothing." Back then, I believed every word. Then things started to change. Late nights at the office, endless meetings, sudden business trips. Every time I asked, he just sighed. "I'm doing this for us, for our future. Why can't you understand?" Until the day I accidentally saw the text message on his phone left on the kitchen counter. "I miss you, Dee. Last night was amazing. Ariel." When I confronted him, Desmond snatched the phone out of my hand. "You going through my phone now? You don't trust me? That's just about work." And I let him convince me. Chose to trust instead of looking straight at the truth. 3 weeks ago, he put a thick stack of insurance paperwork in front of me. You just need to sign here. $3 million to protect us. But why am I the one insured? I asked. Because my company is going through a temporary rough patch. If something happens to you, I'll need the money to keep everything afloat. It's just a precaution, babe. And the trusting wife, like always, signed, never realizing she was signing her own death sentence. Standing now in the recovery room, surrounded by 3 murderers in white coats and tailored suits, I understood something clearly. They had been playing their roles for a very long time. Now it was my turn to step onto the stage. If you're still listening, don't look away, because from this point on, every choice I make will be a line between life and death. I let my whole body shake, this time not entirely an act. I can't. Mrs. Marisol, this is very urgent. Carrington's face darkened slightly. Any delay could be dangerous. I can't, I screamed, jerking the clipboard just enough to look out of control. I feel dizzy, nauseous. Another high-risk surgery. I have to call Desmond's mother. I can't make this decision alone. I broke down, letting my tears spill over like a burst dam. I need to step out. I need air. I need the restroom. Before Carrington or Ariel could fully react, I turned and bolted from the room. Mrs. Marisol, wait! Carrington called after me. But this time, I didn't stop. I ran down the hallway, past the nurse's station, toward the far end, exactly where Janelle had mapped out my escape route. Right then, the fire alarm shrieked through the building. Nurses rushed out of rooms, faces anxious. A security guard ran toward the main elevators, speaking rapidly into his radio. Janelle's distraction had begun. In the chaos, no one noticed a woman in sleepwear, eyes swollen from crying, quietly slipping down a different corridor. I reached the metal door labeled, Service Elevator, Staff Only. I swiped the MasterCard Janelle had given me. The light turned green. The door slid open. I stepped into the narrow elevator and hit the button marked B, Basement. The doors slowly closed, shutting out the blaring alarm and frantic footsteps. Alone in the descending elevator, I leaned back against the wall, feeling my heartbeat pounding like war drums. I had just won the first round. But I also knew, with painful clarity, right now, I was heading straight into the hunter's den. The elevator shuddered gently and stopped with a cold metallic ding. The doors slid open, revealing a world completely different from the bright surgical floor above. The basement was dark, freezing, and heavy with dampness. The ceiling was low, crisscrossed with huge pipes, some leaking, each drop hitting the cracked concrete with a tick that sounded like a countdown to my fate. The fire alarm from above was now just a muffled, distant echo. I stepped out, clutching the access card Janelle had given me. The weak yellow lights cast a dull glow over faded signs. Storage, maintenance, server room. I followed the words like a trail through a maze until I reached 2 doors side by side by side. One wooden door with a polished brass plate. Dr. Elias Carrington, Chief of Surgery. The other, a heavy metal door. Server room, authorized personnel only. This was his lair. I chose the office first, swiped the card. The door opened with an unsettling smoothness. Inside, the room was suspiciously luxurious. Thick carpet, a gleaming mahogany desk, a light-colored leather sofa, the smell of expensive coffee mingled with a hint of cologne that definitely did not belong in a hospital. Blood money, I muttered. I rushed to the massive desk. The drawers were all locked. No time, I snarled under my breath, eyes scanning for something easier to reach. On the bookshelf, between stacks of thick medical textbooks, was a row of file binders. I skimmed the labels. Research, schedules, patients. Nothing obvious. I yanked out a binder labeled Special Cases. Inside, I found it, a thin, unlabeled folder. I opened it. My heart almost stopped. Desmond's full physical report from 2 days earlier. The conclusion printed in red, physical health, optimal. Right beside it was a thicker folder, reeking of money and guilt. financial documents, foreclosure notices, bankruptcy papers for Desmond's construction company, debt totaling in the millions. Now everything was crystal clear. Motive plus opportunity plus executioner. I pulled out my phone and took photos of each page carefully. Medical report, red stamps, bankruptcy notices, each shot like a blade driven back into the heart of the man pretending to be dying upstairs. I put everything back exactly where I'd found it and closed the office door so quietly it didn't make a sound. Now for the most important place, the server room. I walked to the metal door and swiped the card. No alarms. The door opened with a blast of icy air, carrying the constant low roar of countless machines. Inside, the room was lined with server racks. Green and yellow lights flickered like soulless eyes. In one corner was the control station, a bank of monitors, recording equipment, labels beneath the screens. Main lobby, floor 5, underground staff parking. Perfect. I pulled out the USB drive Janelle had given me and plugged it into a data port. A progress bar popped up. Copying, 10%, 20%. My heart beat in time with the numbers. I checked the live feed for the parking garage. Empty. Of course. Desmond had never arrived in an ambulance. 30%, 40%. Please, I whispered. 50%, 60%. Footsteps. I froze instantly. Not random footsteps, not someone passing by. These were the footsteps of someone hunting. The sound rang clearly in the hallway. 2 men, heavy, fast, purposeful. The fire alarm must have been shut off. They were coming down. They were tracking me. 70%, 80%. I swallowed hard, staring at the agonizingly slow progress bar. The footsteps stopped right outside the server room door. My heart seemed to drop into my stomach. She couldn't have gotten far. Dr. Carrington's voice, sharp as a scalpel. I'll check your office. You check the server room. The second voice was deep, probably security. 90%, 95%. I clapped a hand over my mouth, stifling my breath. The doorknob rattled. 98%, 99%. Right then, between the rattle of the handle and the hum of the servers, I understood one terrifying truth. If that door opened before the bar hit 100%, I would die, and no one on earth would ever know why. If you're still listening, don't look away, because the very next second is where everything changes. Copy complete. I yanked the USB out just as the door swung open. Dr. Elias Carrington stood in the doorway. The calm, polished mask he usually wore was gone, replaced by a face twisted with blazing rage. Right behind him, Ariel appeared. She wasn't hiding her smile anymore. A victor's smile. The smile of someone who believes the hunt is over. Looking for something, Marisol? Ariel's voice was soft, syrupy sweet. So sweet it made my skin crawl. And in that moment, I knew. The real hell was only just beginning. A commendable effort, Mrs. Marisol. Dr. Elias Carrington's voice cut through the air like a cold blade. He stepped fully into the server room, the greenish light from the machines casting a calculating sheen over his face. His eyes swept over the recording equipment, then stopped on the USB drive in my hand. Hiding in the staff lounge, pretending to panic, running down to the basement. He smirked. You really think we're too stupid to predict that? I forced my voice to stay as steady as possible. And Nurse Janelle, where is she? Ariel let out a light laugh, the sound like fingernails scraping metal. That busy little nurse, you mean? Dr. Carrington folded his arms, his tone turning glacial. We've taken care of her. She won't be bothering anyone again. A chill slid down my spine. Janelle, what had they done to her? Ariel stepped closer and yanked my phone from my pocket. Let's see. She opened my photo gallery. Oh, there it is. Evidence. She glanced up, an evil smile spreading across her face. How adorable. Then, right in front of me, she swiped. Click, click, click. Desmond's medical report, the bankruptcy documents, everything I had just photographed, deleted, gone without a trace. Perfect, Ariel said, pretending to dust off the screen. That's done. I gripped the USB drive tighter. But I still have this, footage of Desmond walking into the parking garage. Healthy. You can't erase that. Dr. Carrington tilted his head, looking at me the way a professor might look at a particularly slow student. Can't we? He asked mildly, then smiled. Why don't you try opening it? My gaze wavered. The footage you went to so much trouble to copy, Carrington continued in a slow, almost bored tone, is a backup loop. Yesterday's footage. We prepared it in advance for anyone curious enough to think they'd uncovered something. I stared at the USB drive, feeling my entire body drop into an invisible pit. A trap. From the very beginning. And the file in my office? He added, raising an eyebrow. The real medical report was destroyed a long time ago. What you saw was bait. I reeled. My entire break-in, everything I thought was clever, had actually been them leading me by the hand, from the moment Janelle urged me to run, to me hiding in the staff room, to the 5th floor, to the basement. It had all been part of their plan. Welcome to the real trap, Mrs. Marisol, Dr. Carrington said, his voice so soft it was terrifying. Ariel stepped forward from behind him, pulling out a large syringe filled with a clear liquid. Either you sign the consent form willingly, Ariel said, giving the syringe a little shake, or we make you sign, Dr. Carrington finished calmly, without blinking. And in that case, we'll proceed with your emergency procedure right here, right now. The cold air in the server room suddenly felt suffocating. The constant hum of the machines roared in my ears like the frantic pounding of my own heart. I was backed into a corner like prey. 2 predators blocked every exit. Everything I thought was hope was actually just the noose they'd been tightening, inch by inch. In that moment, between the roar of the servers and the predatory gleam in their eyes, I understood one thing. I could not win their game if I kept playing by their rules. And if you're here, still listening to me at this point, hold your breath with me, because the stakes are about to flip. In a way, no one saw coming. I swallowed my fear. Deep beneath the panic, something else was surfacing. A cold anger, a razor-sharp clarity. If all the evidence I had just gathered was fake, then there was only one option left. I had to use the evidence I already had, the thing they didn't know about, couldn't touch, couldn't destroy, and that was my only real chance of surviving this deadly game. I raised both hands, deliberately making them shake as if I were about to collapse. Fine, I lose, I said, my voice choked. You win. Dr. Elias Carrington's mouth curled in smug satisfaction. A wise choice, Mrs. Marisol. I'll sign. I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to sound hoarse and broken. But please, let me make one call. Just one. To Desmond's mother. I just want to hear her voice. One last time. Ariel scoffed. Oh, please, so dramatic. Carrington thought for a moment, then shook his head. No calls. Then, at least give me my phone back, I begged. My family photos, my mother's pictures. They're all in there. Ariel glanced at Carrington. He gave a small nod. Ariel shrugged and tossed the phone at my feet. Here, enjoy your memories. I bent down slowly, every movement intentional. I picked up the phone with trembling hands, but this time I controlled every tremor. I looked at the dark screen and murmured, "Thank you." Then I straightened up, and at that moment my entire demeanor changed. My shoulders squared, my chin lifted, the pleading in my eyes hardened into something cold and unyielding. Both Ariel and Carrington saw it. Their smiles faltered for a split second. "You're right," I said, my voice level and icy. "That was a good play. Very good. But you forgot one thing." Ariel folded her arms, smirking. "And what's that? Go on, enlighten us." "You think I only realized Desmond was cheating tonight?" I swept my gaze over them, slowly, like I was dissecting each one. "But I smelled the rot months ago." I unlocked my phone. Ariel could delete photos from my gallery, but she had no idea about the hidden backup folder in the cloud. "Before I sign anything," I said, my tone sharpening, "I want you to listen to a little gift. Think of it as a goodbye present." I hit play. Silence for a beat. Then Desmond's voice filled the room, clear and chilling. "No, I don't care about the permits. Just make sure the bribe hits the offshore account by the end of the month. $200,000. Clean it through construction supplies. I don't want any questions." There was no mistaking it. My husband's voice. In our very own home office. It was a recording from 4 months ago. I'd captured it when he slammed the door and yelled into the phone for 2 straight hours. I had originally thought I'd use it for a divorce case. I never imagined it would save my life. Ariel's face went pale. Carrington's eyes flew wide open, his lips moving soundlessly. That has nothing to do with," Carrington stammered. "Oh, but it does." I stepped closer. "That recording proves my husband is a criminal, and if the police dig into his transactions, they'll uncover the insurance fraud scheme he's running with you." Ariel clenched her jaw. "You are not walking out of here alive." "Maybe," I replied softly, my voice sliding through the air like a blade. "But this phone," I raised it high, "has been recording our entire conversation since the moment you walked in, and that recording is being uploaded to the cloud right now." Nothing was actually uploading. The signal in the basement was completely dead, but they didn't know that. They only heard the word upload, and that was enough to rattle them. "If I don't enter my security code in the next 3 minutes," I continued, "everything, your threats, your confession, your murder plot, and Desmond's money laundering scheme, will automatically be sent to my lawyer, an editor at the Charlotte Observer, and the district attorney's office." And in that moment, I saw something I had never seen before. Fear. Real fear. In the eyes of 2 people who thought they were untouchable. If you've stayed with me this far, grip the railing, because from here on out, everything explodes in ways no one expects. "Stop her!" Carrington shouted, truly panicked now. "Ariel, inject her! Now!" Ariel finally snapped out of her daze. She lunged at me, syringe raised like a dagger. I backed up against the server racks, my face as cold as stone. "You're not going anywhere," Ariel hissed. She lifted her hand to strike, and at that exact moment, "Don't move!" A new voice thundered through the basement, furious, authoritative, and so familiar that both Carrington and Ariel froze mid-motion. I turned my head. A figure stood in the doorway, soaked with rain, breathing hard, eyes blazing like he'd just walked out of hell. Desmond. The server room door crashed open with a deafening bang. Desmond stood in the doorway, no trace left of the man who had supposedly just cheated death on an operating table. His face was flushed with rage, his eyes as sharp and cold as a blade searching for something to stab. "What the hell are you people doing down here?" His roar echoed through the room. The plan was in recovery, not in the basement. But as his gaze swept across the room, he froze. Dr. Carrington in a panic, Ariel frozen in mid-motion, syringe raised, and me, standing tall now, no longer crumpled on the floor, holding my phone like a weapon. The moment Desmond looked at me, I watched everything shift across his face. Shock, recognition, and then, colder than steel, hatred. He knew. His wife had heard, and she knew everything. The air was so heavy that it felt like a single breath could light the fuse. Desmond stepped fully into the room, each slow step radiating menace. "So, You know then. His voice was low now, slick like oil. I know everything, Desmond, I answered, steady, unshaken. The fake surgery, the insurance policy, the plan to kill me on the operating table tomorrow morning. Desmond snapped his head toward Carrington, his face twisting with rage. You said she wouldn't find out. You said you handled Janelle. Carrington stammered like a schoolboy caught cheating. She trapped us. She faked everything, and she has an old recording. About you. About your business dealings. What recording? Desmond hissed. I didn't answer. I just unlocked my phone and hit play. Desmond's voice filled the room. $200,000. Clean it through construction supplies. I don't want any questions. His voice, thick with guilt, was as clear as if he were standing there reading it out loud. Desmond shut his eyes. He remembered that call. He knew exactly where he'd been, and he knew he had just stripped himself bare. You? Desmond stared at me. You used that to trap me? That's just the beginning, I replied. And this, I raised the phone, has recorded everything. Dr. Carrington's confession, Ariel's threats, and you confirming the whole plan. Desmond twisted his mouth into a grotesque smile. You think I'm stupid, Marisol? This is the basement. No signal, no cloud. It's not going anywhere. I felt my heart hitch for a second. He was right. He knew me too well. Give me the phone, Desmond said, holding out his hand. Now. No. Give it to me. He lunged faster than I expected. His large hand clamped around my wrist, twisting it so hard I almost screamed from the pain. The phone slipped from my fingers, hit the concrete, skidded, and the screen cracked. Desmond laughed. Game over. He lifted his foot, ready to stomp the phone to pieces, and at that exact moment, too late. A new voice rang out, loud, clear, sharp as a knife, carrying authority like thunder. We all spun around. For a heartbeat, it was as if the entire server room gasped. You could feel the power shift, sudden, sharp, and ice cold. If this were a movie, this would be the moment the audience sat bolt upright, holding their breath, waiting to see what happened next. At the doorway stood Nurse Janelle, alive, unharmed, not a scratch on her. And behind her, 2 hospital security guards, tall, stone-faced. Desmond's eyes flew wide in horror. Carrington recoiled like he'd just seen a ghost. No, that's impossible. Ariel dropped the syringe, her lips trembling violently. Janelle stepped forward, her voice now completely free of fear. Dr. Carrington, do you still want to try denying anything? And there I was, in the middle of the server room, feeling, for the first time tonight, that I was no longer fighting alone. Dr. Carrington, did you really think I would let Mrs. Marisol walk into your trap alone? Janelle spoke as she walked into the room like she was the one in control now. The fire alarm wasn't to distract security, she continued, her voice razor sharp. It was to distract you. While you were chasing Marisol, I and these 2... She gestured to the security guards behind her. We're in the central control room. We disabled your fake video loop. Janelle lifted her chin and pointed at the security camera in the corner of the ceiling. Its red light was blinking steadily, recording every second inside the icy server room. That camera has seen everything, Janelle said, her voice landing like a judge's gavel. Every threat, every confession. The head of security is watching live as we speak. Desmond, Dr. Carrington, and Ariel all looked up at the camera, faces drained of all color. They had walked straight into their own trap. And that USB drive, I added, pointing at the port on the machine, was just bait. While you were obsessed with it, Janelle was in the control room, copying the real footage, including the scene of Desmond walking in through the staff entrance, laughing with Ariel. We have it all. A chilling silence descended over the room. The hum of the servers sounded like the last breath of a dying scheme. Desmond's face turned ashen. His perfect plan was collapsing right in front of him. Carrington was the first to crumble mentally. His eyes darted around, desperately searching for an exit. When his gaze landed on the syringe Ariel had dropped, I knew what was about to happen. With an animalistic growl, Carrington lunged for it. "You are not taking me alive!" But he didn't come for me. He went for Janelle, the one holding all the technical proof. "Janelle, watch out!" I screamed. But the nurse didn't panic. It was as if she'd already rehearsed this moment in her mind. Just as Carrington came within reach, Janelle whipped a small syringe from her uniform pocket and drove it into his thigh. "Use this instead," she said icily. "Maximum dose sedative. You know exactly how it works better than anyone. Don't you, doctor?" Carrington froze, his eyes rolling back, then collapsed to the floor like a puppet with its strings cut, unconscious. Ariel screamed, her voice cracking, then tried to push past the guard to run. They caught her as easily as snatching a tissue. "It wasn't my idea. Desmond made me do it. It was him. It was all him," she wailed as the cuffs snapped around her wrists. That left only Desmond standing, watching his accomplices sprawled on the floor, watching Ariel in handcuffs, watching me, standing tall, no longer bending under him, his face twisted with hatred and terror. "This is all your fault!" Desmond roared. He charged at me like a cornered animal. The security guard stepped forward. "Sir, stop right there!" But Desmond was too fast, too desperate. He slammed into the guard's chest, forcing him back. In a flash, his hand grabbed my collar and yanked hard. My head snapped forward. My shoulder burned as his fingernails tore through fabric. "I'll kill you!" But I was no longer the woman from the beginning of this story. Fear had been replaced by pure survival instinct. I drove my knee up hard into his groin. Desmond groaned but still didn't let go, only becoming more frenzied. "Let her go!" Janelle shouted. The guard lunged from behind, clamping Desmond into a hold. "You're under arrest!" But Desmond thrashed violently. In his frenzy, he dragged me with him, nearly choking me. "Let go!" I shouted, tearing my hospital gown to wrench free from his grip. Desmond gathered every last bit of strength to twist out of the guard's hold. A brutal spin, and that spin became his final downfall. It happened too fast for the eye to fully track, yet in my mind it played in slow motion, mercilessly clear. A man who once thought he was untouchable, brought down not by his enemies, but by his own blind rage. If you're watching this in your mind, this is the moment you physically cannot look away. Desmond's foot caught on Carrington's unconscious body. He lost his balance and crashed toward the server rack. His back hit first, then his head snapped back, slamming into the sharp steel edge. Crack. Not loud, but chilling. The entire room fell silent. Ariel stopped crying. Janelle froze. The guard held his breath. Desmond crumpled into a half-seated position on the floor, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. His eyes were wide open, but the fire was gone. Only raw, absolute terror remained. He tried to speak. No sound came at first. "I can't move." His voice was nothing but air. "My legs, my arms, I can't feel anything." I looked at the man who had tried to stage my death, now stripped of his own ability to move by his very own hands. The irony was brutal and perfect, in a way that made my skin crawl. Janelle whispered, "Oh my God." I didn't answer. Inside me was only a cold, hollow space. No satisfaction, no pity, just an ending. "Don't touch him," the security guard warned as I stepped closer. "His neck might be broken. Wait for the med team." The server room door opened again. This time, it was the head of security with 2 city police officers. They stopped in the doorway, taking in the scene. Ariel in cuffs, sobbing uncontrollably. Carrington unconscious on the floor. Desmond motionless, nearly paralyzed. And me, clothes torn but standing, alive in the middle of the wreckage. The game was over. That morning, dawn came slowly, as if the sky itself was trying to make sense of what had just happened. The first rays of sunlight slipped into the hospital lobby, soft but cold, strangely distant to me. I sat in a quiet staff waiting room, wrapped in a thick hospital blanket. Janelle sat beside me, holding 2 cups of hot tea that neither of us touched. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We had already told everything far too many times. To the head of security, to the police detectives, then to the prosecutor. The server room was now a crime scene. Dr. Carrington woke up, handcuffed to a hospital bed. Ariel was led into a police car at first light, her hysterical screams echoing across the empty parking lot. And Desmond. The medical team went down to the basement with extreme caution. His neck stabilized with a rigid collar, his body strapped to a spine board, then straight to the ER, then MRI, and finally to the trauma unit. The verdict came just as the sun rose. Fracture of the C5 vertebra, severed spinal cord, quadriplegia, for life. He could breathe on his own, barely, but everything from the neck down was paralyzed. Nothing would ever come back. The days that followed passed like fog. I stayed at my parents' house, avoiding everyone except my lawyer. The news exploded across every screen. Fake surgery scandal at Queen City Regional Hospital. Images of Desmond, Ariel, and Carrington were everywhere, like stains that wouldn't wash out. Justice came quickly. The video and audio evidence from the server room were so clear that no one could deny anything. Carrington was charged with a long list of crimes: conspiracy to commit murder, assault, insurance fraud, gross medical negligence. Janelle's testimony opened an entire investigation into previous suspicious surgeries. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, stripped of his medical license, condemned to die in disgrace. Ariel got 25 years. Janelle was praised as a hero. After the hospital's leadership was completely replaced, they appointed her Director of Ethics and Patient Safety. She accepted, determined never to let another Carrington exist in the system. And me, I filed for divorce the same day Desmond was transferred out of the ICU. My evidence included attempted murder, money laundering, everything attached. The court granted the divorce immediately, no trial necessary. All of Desmond's assets were frozen. The insurance policy was canceled. The millions in debt became his burden, or rather, the burden of the state-appointed guardian assigned to him. I was free, legally, financially, and emotionally. 2 months later, I knew I needed closure, and I went to see Desmond one last time. No more fancy hospital. He had been moved to a long-term care facility for inmates with special medical needs. The room was small, sterile, reeking of bleach. Desmond lay motionless on a specialized bed, his head fixed in a metal frame. His eyes were fixed on the ceiling, as if staring into an endless void. When I stepped in, his gaze jerked toward the door. I wore a simple navy dress and stood tall, strong, composed, calm, a version of myself he had never been able to control. His face contorted with hatred, but he was powerless. He tried to form words, but only produced a horrible bubbling sound. I walked closer, stood by the bed, looking at the man I once loved. I felt no anger, no pity, just closure. "You wanted to put me on an operating table," I said, my voice flat, almost icy. "You wanted me helpless, living off machines so you could start your new life." Desmond let out a strangled hiss, utterly powerless. "Now you're the one lying here," I said, leaning slightly closer. "You're the one who depends on others to stay alive, for the rest of your life. Ironic, isn't it?" I straightened, giving him one last look. "Enjoy the rest of your life," I said. Then I turned and walked out of that dark room, like stepping out of an old cage. Outside, the morning light was bright. The air was clean. I took a deep breath. For the first time in a very long time, I was truly free. I went down the steps toward my car, toward the new life waiting for me. There are moments when a life turns the page, not with some loud catastrophe, but with a quiet, steady breath of freedom. If you're still with me at this point, stay a little longer. Because Marisol's journey doesn't end when the betrayer falls. It truly begins when she learns to stand up for herself. A year passed. I, Marisol Grant, stood before a group of women at the Charlotte Women's Support Center. Janelle sat in the front row, smiling softly, a reminder that I was not alone. My story, I began, is not just about betrayal. It's a journey of learning how to look at myself again and recognizing the warning signs I ignored for far too long. I handed them a list. Red flags. In a relationship, sudden, unexplained changes in behavior, especially around money, pressuring you to sign important documents without clear explanations, trying to isolate you from family and friends, controlling all the finances, making you doubt your own instincts. If the person you love suddenly wants you to take out a large life insurance policy with them as the beneficiary, I paused. Ask why. Ask a lot of whys. Don't sign just because you trust them. After the session, a young woman approached me, eyes red from crying. "Thank you," she whispered. "My husband brought home an insurance policy last week. I was about to sign it. Now I'm going to sit down and talk to him first." I gently touched her hand. That was why I was telling this story. If even one woman could be saved from the nightmare I almost walked into, then every bit of my pain meant something. I had learned that. Trust, but verify. Love is not supposed to be blind. Your instincts exist to protect you. Listen to them. You are stronger than you think, even on your darkest days, and never let anyone have total control over your life. That evening, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, looking out over the Charlotte skyline. I no longer lived in Dilworth, the place filled with painful memories. I had started a new chapter. My phone rang. It was Janelle. "Hey, you free tonight?" "Yeah, why?" "The support group wants to take you out to dinner. They want to thank you." I smiled. "I'll be there." I glanced down at my bare finger, where my wedding ring used to be. Now there was only me. And that was perfect. I had survived. Not just survived. I had grown, become stronger, clearer. And every day, I chose to live, not because of betrayal, not because of revenge, but because of myself. If you've stayed with me all the way to these final lines, thank you, truly. Stories like this aren't just meant to be heard. They are reminders that we all deserve to be loved safely. If you want to keep walking with me through more journeys of healing, growth, and strength like this, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any upcoming stories. Who knows? The next story might be exactly what you need to hear right now.